The low hum of conversation and clinking glasses filled the warm air of the restaurant. The Lakeview Grill was one of those places Ethan liked to bring people when he wanted to impress them. It was polished with dark wood booths and a bar lined with gleaming bottles, the kind of establishment where waiters glided across the floor as if they were performing on stage. Linda sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her pearls catching the light from the chandelier above. Across the table, Ethan leaned back in his chair, shoulders squared, his confidence filling the space like smoke. He was 34 now, and he had perfected the art of self-promotion. Tonight was no different. He launched into another story about Hailtech, his tone clipped and rehearsed, eyes bright whenever his colleagues nodded in admiration. They were younger men and women in sleek suits, colleagues from his sales department, who had joined us for dinner. They laughed at his jokes. They raised their glasses whenever he ragged about another closed deal. And they looked at me the way one looks at someone's father, polite but distant, as if I was a relic from another time. I let him talk. Linda smiled proudly, her hand occasionally brushing his arm as if to say she was on his side. I sat with my water glass in hand, listening. Ethan described the last quarter, rattling off numbers and percentages, his voice growing louder as if volume proved his success. Then he paused, leaned forward, and with a glance at me, his smile turned sharp. Some fathers struggle to let go, he said, his tone light enough to be mistaken for a joke, but edged like a blade. At a certain point, though, holding on only slows everyone else down. You know, it becomes dead weight. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. For a moment, no one spoke. His colleagues shifted in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Linda's smile faltered, but she quickly forced it back, nodding, as though Ethan had only made an observation. My fingers tightened around the glass, not enough to show anger, but enough that I felt the coolness bite into my skin. Dead weight. My own son. In front of his peers, in front of his mother, reducing me to a burden. I could feel the sting rising in my chest, the humiliation blooming like fire under my skin. But I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me wounded. I set the glass down slowly, the sound of it touching the table crisp in the silence. I looked him in the eye, steady and calm. In 24 hours, Ethan, you will understand the real weight of that word. I did not raise my voice, I did not break eye contact. His smirk faltered for the first time all evening. His colleagues looked at one another, sensing something had shifted, though they did not know what. Linda's eyes darted between us, her lips parting, as if she wanted to smooth it over to say something that would erase the sting of what had just happened. But she said nothing. The waiter arrived just then with plates balanced carefully in his arms, breaking the tension as he set dishes before us. The clatter of cutlery returned, though the unease lingered like a shadow. I leaned back, picked up my fork, and let him have the floor again. He wanted to be the center of attention, to prove himself the star of the evening. Let him. My words were already working their way into him, and by tomorrow he would discover just how heavy the truth could be. The meal went on, the conversation stumbling back into numbers and market talk, but for me the night had ended with that single sentence. My son had called me dead weight, and I had promised him a lesson. The rest was simply waiting. She asked if he meant it. I said he had meant to show his colleagues that he was unafraid to insult the past in order to claim the future. She said she was going to call him. Linda started to protest, said tonight was not the night to escalate, that he needed rest, that we did too. Chloe said someone needed to hold a line. She said he is trying to carry what you carried at his age, and that he does not know how heavy it is. She said he spoke poorly, but that under the poor words was a good intention, the drive to move the company forward. I told her the company was not a staircase he built alone. I told her there is a kind of hunger that makes people forget who cooked their first meals. She said I had stepped away, that I had chosen the porch and the garden and a simpler life, that I had asked to be in the background. I said I had stepped aside to make room not to be erased. She said he had doubled down. He told her that tough language wins tough markets. He told her that I needed to learn to accept where I fit now. He told her that tomorrow would prove everything. She said Dad does not need me to fight his fights, but I will not watch my brother talk to him that way. I took a legal pad from the drawer and wrote down the morning. 4 Seasons, Denver, 9 o'clock board prep and client pitch. Ethan leading, Mark present, Harold chairing, Samantha on call. I heard Linda and Chloe talking in low voices in the kitchen. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Mark. I pressed call and he answered on the second ring. I told him we needed to meet in the morning before the session. I told him there was a problem that would be better handled with certainty than surprise. He asked if this was about Ethan. I told him it was. Mark said he had seen signs and that he had hoped maturity would catch up to ambition. He said 9 o'clock was locked, but that he would meet me at 8 in the conference room down the hall, the one with the glass wall that looks over 17th Street. He said he would tell Harold to arrive early if I wanted a witness. I told him that would be wise. I sent a short text to Samantha, asked her to be at the hotel by 7:45 with the folder and a clean copy set. She replied within a minute that she would be there and that she would bring the registry extracts as well. Chloe knocked lightly on the open frame and stepped in. I told her water would be fine. She set a glass on the coaster and stood for a moment, then said she was proud of me. I thanked her and told her pride cuts 2 ways that I was proud of the woman she had become. She told me she would come to the hotel if I wanted her there. I told her to go to school in the morning, as planned, that I would call her after the session ended. She said she did not like being in the middle of the 2 men she loved. She said she believed Ethan was a good man, and that I was a good man, and that good men can still hurt each other when they are blind to the thing they most need to see. I told her I did not intend to hurt him. I told her I intended to put the truth on the table and let him decide what kind of man he wanted to be standing beside it. When I woke before dawn, the city was still the kind of stillness that feels like the world has taken a breath and is holding it. I locked the door and walked to the car. I opened the door, sat and started the engine. I pulled away from the curb and headed toward downtown, where light would soon fill the glass towers and where a room was waiting for the truth to arrive first. The city was waking, and I was driving toward a room that would ask me to remember who I was before titles and distance and a garden that did not need me to prove anything. One moment I was passing the Capitol Dome, the next I was standing again in that narrow office off Larimer Street in the fall of 2010. Mark had brought a cafetiere and 2 chipped mugs, and we had signed our names on a stack of papers that turned an idea into a company. When the notary left, Mark grinned in a way I had not seen since we were young and stupid, and certain that what we made could matter. I said it anyway, and the man across the table did not blink. He asked if we could scale quickly, and I said yes, because there are only 2 honest answers in that moment, and the first one never buys you time. We had built something that could carry weight beyond our bodies. We had bent both in those early years. We had pushed invoices early and begged vendors for another week. We had tried to remember that the people we hired were not extensions of our ambition. They were the reason for it. Ethan had been 25 when he first walked into our new lobby, with a badge that Chloe had said made him look grown. I had asked him to start on a smaller account, and he had rolled his eyes in a way he would later deny. He had closed that account in 6 weeks. I had been proud, in a way that surprised even me. I had decided then that I would not push him into the spotlight. I would place him quietly where he could learn to hold heat without burning. I wanted to buy him time to learn the second lesson. I eased the car along the curb, and a young man stepped forward with a practiced smile. The lobby doors admitted a spill of scent that was all polished stone and careful flowers. I crossed into the quiet, and the marble underfoot gave a little echo with each step. The front desk clerk looked up and wished me good morning, and I answered with the same words, because civility is an agreement you keep, even when you are here to break a different kind of silence. I rode the elevator alone and watched floors tick up without sound. My hand found the edge of the folder in the brief, and the cardboard gave back the reassuring stiffness of something prepared. The doors opened to a corridor as calm as a chapel. Conference rooms sat behind frosted glass with names I did not recognize, probably mountain ranges or old governors. At the end of the hall, the glass wall to the side room looked out over 17th Street, exactly as Mark had said. The city ran below like a diagram that explained itself. I stepped inside and placed the brief on the table. A car horn floated up, faint and brief, and then was gone. It would have been easy to sit and let the chair hold me. Instead, I walked the perimeter once, reading the room the way you read a map before a hike. Whiteboard with fresh markers, screen ready to mirror a laptop, pitch table centered with a small bowl of mints, green and white. I opened the brief and laid out the papers in order. Charter copy, registry extracts, share ledger with the allocation marked in clear bands of color. Samantha had tabbed each section with care. I ran a thumb along the tabs as if confirming they were real. They were real. The work was real. The years were real. The love was real even when it looked like distance. I checked my watch and realized I had come early even for an early meeting. The room was quiet enough that I could hear ductwork settle. My mind moved back to a night in 2018 when I had told Mark I was ready to step away. He had stared at the far wall for a long minute and then said he did not want to lose me. I had told him he would not. He would gain a shadow that took no salary and asked for nothing but time to see if a son could make a name without a father standing beside him. We had shaken hands because we are men who still believe in hands as contracts. I had walked home that night under a sky like black glass and listened to my footsteps and felt something like relief and something like grief and decided that both could live in the same body. The elevator chimed and footsteps approached. I gathered the papers into 2 neat stacks and lined up the edges. In the glass, I could see the city brightening, each pane catching more of a day that had made up its mind. I took one breath and then another and let the rhythm of them reset the rhythm of the room. The door eased open and a familiar shape filled the frame. Mark stood there with the same shoulders that had carried servers and desks and bad news through narrow hallways. He closed the door behind him and crossed to the table with an expression that was all business and all brother. I handed him the top sheet and kept my eyes on his as he read. He asked how I wanted to do it. I told him I would not derail the agenda before the client pitch. I said Ethan should have the dignity of his own presentation and the rope that comes with it. She said the filings were certified and current, the countersigned amendments included, and the board resolutions from 2018 were clipped behind the ledger so there would be no question about my status. He asked if the boy had truly used the phrase last night. I said he had. When he opened them, he said the board would not tolerate a campaign to disenfranchise a founder under the banner of modernization. Ethan would open at 9 o'clock with the overview. After the forecast segment and the go-to-market timeline, Ethan would move into a slide about governance efficiencies. That was where he had laced his argument for reducing the influence of legacy shareholders. A text from Linda asked if I had slept, and if I would be careful with our son. I told her to stay at school and that I would see her tonight. I told her I already had them and lifted a sleeve to show the small gleam. Mark glanced at my wrist and his mouth moved into a shape that suggested a smile that did not quite arrive. He said the jeweler had given us a discount that day and we had walked out as if we had robbed a bank. We moved to the main conference suite 5 minutes before 9. The space was larger, the air cooler, the screen already lit with the company logo. The long table glowed under pendant lights, and the far wall of glass poured the city into the room. A handful of senior managers were already in their seats flipping through printed decks or checking their phones with the small flicks of thumbs that pass for prayer in modern offices. Michael Torres arrived with an associate and shook hands with Harold and Mark, and then turned to me with polite interest, the kind reserved for someone whose name he could not place. He asked how I was connected, and I told him I was family. He said he was looking forward to the presentation and took his seat at the right, as predicted. Ethan entered with 2 of his team and an energy that said he had slept well. He greeted Michael warmly and thanked everyone for the early hour and promised to keep the pace lively. He took the head of the table, set his laptop on the small stand, and glanced around as if to confirm the audience he wanted was the audience he had. His eyes passed over me without catching and then returned to the screen. Mark sat to his left. Harold sat to his right. Samantha slipped into a chair against the back wall with a notebook closed on her lap. Ethan opened with a snapshot of the quarter. He spoke cleanly, the numbers crisp, the line graphs kind. He gave credit to his team by first name to the ones in the room, and Michael nodded as he heard the account names attached to results he liked. Ethan clicked through market share, pipeline velocity, and customer retention rates. He had done the work. There was craft in the cadence. I found myself proud of the part of him that could do this without cruelty. Then he arrived at the transition slide. Governance efficiencies sat in pale blue across a white field. He began to talk about speed of decision and clarity of mandate. He said modern companies sharpen themselves by trimming the parts that no longer carry weight. He said maturity sometimes meant severing sentimental ties. He said legacy shareholders with no operational role can distort incentives and slow change. He did not say dead weight. He did not need to. The phrase hung there anyway, because silence remembers. Mark let him finish without a flinch. Then he thanked him and asked for a brief pause for board business. Ethan stepped back anyway, as if he had felt a drop in the room. Mark looked at me and then at Samantha. I stood. I said my name and that I would be brief. I said that in 2010, in a small office on Larimer Street, a few signatures had turned effort into a structure, and that since that morning I had borne the duties that came with those signatures. Samantha placed copies at the ends of the table. I set the originals before Harold and kept my hands open at my side so that no one would read aggression where there was none. Ethan stared and looked as if his eyes could not decide where to land. First the papers, then my cufflink, then my face, then Mark, then Michael, then back to me. A flush crept up his neck. He did not speak. The room held its breath the way it does when a pane of glass is struck and everyone waits to know whether it will crack or hold. Harold cleared his throat and said for the record that the documents affirmed my position and that there would be no changes to shareholder rights today. He said the board would review governance discussion at a future meeting and that respect would anchor the review. Michael shifted slightly in his chair, as if a weight had moved from one shoulder to the other and now sat where it belonged. Ethan swallowed hard. He said he had not been aware of the full history. His voice was smaller, and the words dropped close to his feet instead of reaching the table. Mark asked him to take a seat. He did stiffly, as if the chair might refuse him. Mark looked down the length of the table and said that the presentation would continue after a short recess. He said coffee was on the sideboard and that there were fresh bagels if anyone needed to reset their morning. He did not look at me as he said it, and I respected the kindness of that choice. I stepped back from the head of the table and felt the room releasing its held breath in small, private sighs. I walked to the glass wall and let my eyes fall to the street below. The traffic had thickened, the city fully awake. In the reflection, I could see Ethan sitting with his hands flat on the table, his face turned away from everyone. I could see Samantha standing like a small lighthouse against the back wall. I could see Mark speaking quietly to Harold. I could feel the next hour gathering itself, the way weather gathers at a ridgeline, inevitable and slow, and about to become rain. Mark touched my elbow and said he would check on Michael. I told him that the company had been built to serve customers who valued substance over fashion. I told her to stay. I said I had no objection to a hard conversation about the future, and that I had only come to correct a misunderstanding about the past. He said he had not been fully briefed and that the process had been opaque. He said he had assumed the legacy position was ceremonial. I said I expected nothing less. We returned to the room together, but a pace apart. The managers drifted back to their seats. He moved back to the safer ground of product roadmap and customer success. He spoke about an upgrade scheduled for the fall and the way it would cut onboarding time by a third. I watched Michael nod and ask a short question about integration with a reporting system his people already used. Mark asked about pricing tiers, and Ethan explained the logic that had shaped them. I felt that brief ripple of pride again, small and real, the way you feel when a child carries a heavy box without asking for help, and also without pretending it is light. He gave the credit lines to the team leads with their proper titles. Near the end of the deck, he paused on a slide about culture. Respect was still there in the first position. Build trust before you ask for speed. Tell the truth when it is easy so you know how when it is not. Share the work and the win. Then he did a thing I did not expect. He said accountability was how you knew it was real. Harold thanked him and turned to Michael for questions. Michael asked three, all practical. He wanted a clearer date on a feature, a named contact for a security review, and a small change to a service level clause. Ethan confirmed the first assigned the second to the director who had spoken earlier and said the third could be adjusted and would be drafted by counsel. Samantha made a note, then looked up and gave the slightest nod to indicate feasibility. Mark thanked Michael and said that if there were no further questions, they would move to timelines for the customer steering committee. The room had found its rhythm. The sky beyond the glass had settled into the kind of honest blue that makes a city look sincere. I felt tension leave my neck in a slow line. I let myself breathe like a man in water who can finally put his feet down and feel the bottom. A junior manager passed behind me to the credenza and almost spilled coffee on the stack of handouts. I steadied the cup with 2 fingers and set it safely on a coaster. He said a quick thank you and retreated, cheeks pink. Small rescues have a way of easing everyone in a room. Harold asked if there were any board items that needed acknowledgement before lunch. Mark said no formal votes were scheduled. Samantha said the draft minutes would reflect the clarification of record, and she would circulate them by afternoon. No one argued. Clarification is lighter than controversy. It leaves fewer fingerprints. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I ignored it. The city did not need to reach into this hour. Ethan advanced to the final slide. It was only a single phrase laid across a photograph of the product in use. He said that the team was ready to deliver, that the next quarter would decide momentum for the next year, and that he welcomed scrutiny on any number he had spoken. He closed the laptop not with a flourish, but with a careful hand, as if to say the tool mattered and should be treated that way. The managers began to gather their notes. Michael stood and shook hands around the nearest end of the table and said he looked forward to the next meeting. Mark suggested a break before internal items. People stood again. This time the energy was cleaner. The tension had not vanished, but it had chosen a chair and sat down. Ethan stayed where he was, head slightly bowed, fingers drumming once on the lid of his machine, then still. I walked to the glass and let the light throw a rectangle across my shoes. Samantha came to my side and said the minutes line would be clear enough to forestall any later confusion. I thanked her. She said she would send a scanned set of the originals to my counsel for the file. I thanked her again and asked her to label the folder with the simplest possible words. She said she already had. Harold approached and asked if I wished to address the room before they moved to the next section. I told him not yet. I said there would be a better moment, one that belonged to the people rather than the paperwork. He studied me for a second and then said that restraint was still my best habit. Mark joined us and asked if I wanted to grab a hallway seat for a minute. I told him I would stay put. He said he would bring Michael over for a quick handshake with the founder for the sake of decency and history. I told him I would prefer that introduction to wait until the end of the day. I did not want a moment of grace to feel like a stunt. Ethan finally stood and walked toward the sideboard. He poured water into a glass and took 2 sips as if learning how to drink again. He caught my eye, and there was no smirk in it, only calculation giving way to something raw. He walked over and stopped an arm's length away. He said he would adjust the governance slide before it went to distribution. He said he understood that he had trespassed on ground he did not own. He said he wanted a chance to make that right. I told him that making it right would be measured in how he treated people who could not repay him. He nodded once. His jaw moved as if he had more to say, but the words were not ready. He turned back to the table and sat down. Harold tapped the table twice with his knuckles in the way he does when he wants attention, without a gavel. The room quieted almost instantly. Mark said they would continue with internal review and that he appreciated everyone's patience. People found their seats as if they had been sitting there for years. The screen shifted to an agenda slide, and the bullets waited calmly for voices to give them shape. I took my chair halfway down the table and placed my hands flat for a second, feeling the grain under my fingertips. The city outside shone brighter, and the glass threw it back at itself. Inside, the air cooled again as the building system adjusted to the bodies in the room. I felt the steady pull of the hour resume each minute, taking its turn like cars at a well-run intersection. We were not done. We had only reset the terms. Mark cleared his throat and began to speak about staffing bans and capital allocations. Pens lifted, heads inclined. The work moved forward in the way it always should, without flourish and without cruelty. I let the sound fill me and waited for the next place where the truth would need to be set down again, not as a weapon, but as weight that keeps the table from tipping. Mark walked the table through staffing bans and capital allocations, his voice even the projections tidy. A director explained a plan to reduce overlapping contracts. Another added that the security review would compress timelines. Michael asked if the changes would touch any of his integration points. Ethan replied that the team would mirror impact before any cutover and that there would be no disruption to his service levels. We were almost at the end of the internal review when a board member I did not know well asked for a return to the earlier theme of governance. He said he wanted a brief on how authority would be clarified without signaling instability to the field. Mark turned to Ethan with an invitation in his eyes. Ethan nodded, stood, and returned to the head of the table. Decision speed. Accountability lanes. Continuity of stewardship. He said that speed mattered most when aligned with trust, and that anything else was reckless. He said that accountability was only real if people could name who owned a call and why. He said that continuity meant you did not saw through a beam because it was old if the house still stood on it. He said he had used language in the draft that did not reflect those values, and that he would remove any phrasing that suggested cutting for the pleasure of cutting. He looked toward Harold, and then toward me, and said that stewardship had faces and names and work behind it, and that he understood that now. Harold thanked him and asked Samantha to flag the minutes so that any prior references to legacy dilution would be set aside pending a formal review. He said that he appreciated the clarity, and that as a customer, he watched two things when he decided to stay with a partner. He asked Ethan and then Mark and then me by a glance whether the company could promise that the people who built the house would be honored as the house was remodeled. Mark answered first and said that this was the plain intent. Ethan followed and said that the promise would be his to keep in the way he ran the room and the floor beneath it. Harold checked his watch and declared a 10-minute break before the final scheduling. Ethan said he had work to do beyond a slide edit. He said he had been wrong in his assumptions about influence and history. He said he had let the desire to appear decisive take the place of being precise. I told him that strength without humility looks like a stunt, and that people see through stunts, but that humility with responsibility reads as leadership. I told him he could begin by speaking to his team tonight and telling them where he had missed and what he had learned. He said he would. Ethan answered in 2 sentences that were crisp and without bravado. Samantha appeared at my side and said in a low voice that the scanned set of originals had been transmitted to my counsel and that the hard copies were back in the folio. She asked if I wanted the cufflink story on the record or kept as our own. I told her to keep it as ours. She drifted away again as if she had never been there. Harold called the room to order with that quiet double tap. The agenda on the screen promised only schedules and next steps. Mark steered us through dates with customers and dates with compliance and dates with the recruiting pipeline. Ethan took notes like a man who intended to earn the thing he was holding. His pen moved in a new way, not frantic, not performative. Near the end, Harold asked if there were any final remarks from leadership. Mark shook his head. He looked to me. I hesitated and then spoke. I said that the first job of a founder is to build a place where people can do honest work without fear. I said the second job is to know when to get out of the way and let that work continue. I said that today had reminded me that stepping aside is not the same as disappearing. The sentence lay there and did not require more. Harold thanked me with a nod. Ethan kept his eyes on his notebook. Michael stood and said that he appreciated the morning and would see us in 2 weeks for the steering session. He shook hands down the line, thanked the project director by name, and left with his associate. The room loosened in the way rooms do when the most important guest has gone, and the people who remain can exhale like themselves. Samantha began gathering stray copies again. Mark closed his binder and let out a breath he had probably been holding since dawn. Harold told the board they were adjourned until 1. Ethan stayed seated as others drifted out. He ran a hand over the closed laptop and then set both palms on the table. He said that he needed to call his mother. I said Linda would be waiting to hear that the day had gone without damage. He looked at me as if trying to decide if I had meant to comfort him or remind him what damage means. I kept my face calm. He stood and said he would find a quiet corner. He walked out with the laptop under his arm again, and I watched the door close gently behind him. The room was nearly empty. The city brightened one more shade. Mark came to stand beside me and said that the foundation had held. He said that we had weather to come, but that the shape of it was better now. He asked if I wanted lunch or 15 minutes of silence. I said 15. He clapped my shoulder once and told me he would be back with something that passed for soup. I nodded and stayed where I was as the hum of the building settled into a long, even note. The chair waited for me. I did not sit. I let the quiet re-enter the space between my ribs, and I waited for the next hour to announce itself, not with applause or alarms, but with the small sound that truth makes when it takes its seat and refuses to be moved. Harold checked the clock and said that the board would reconvene in closed session for a few minutes. Harold said that standard practice would ask senior staff to step out. I said I preferred that he remain. Harold asked Samantha to summarize the state of record. She said that the charter and registry extracts confirmed founding status and voting rights. She said that the board resolutions from 2018 documented a voluntary step back from day-to-day work without surrender of ownership or influence. She said that any attempt to dilute or sideline a founder through policy without a formal process would risk breach of duty and create exposure for anyone who sponsored it. Harold asked whether council recommended a vote. Samantha said that a motion to reaffirm the charter and to adopt respectful governance language would be prudent. He said that the motion carried and asked Samantha to mark it. Mark said that he and I would send a joint note by end of day. I said that the note should speak of gratitude and continuity and the work that matters. She had received 3 separate messages since morning from employees who had heard snippets of the earlier presentation. She said the phrase about trimming parts that no longer carry weight had been repeated in a way that sounded personal. She said she understood that context had changed, but that culture is what people think happens in the next room when no one important is listening. She said that the leader who had introduced the line should address the team directly with a clear commitment to respect. She said that the scanned set of originals had been countersigned for receipt by my counsel, and that the file now carried 2 custody logs. She said that if we were going to preach respect, we should practice it in the way we closed this session. He said that the board had taken a brief action to restate our shared facts. He said that continuity was not a slogan and that no one would be erased. He thanked the team for the morning and said we would close on scheduling and communication. Ethan rose and asked to speak to the room for 2 minutes. He said that earlier language he had drafted did not reflect our values. He said he had allowed the appearance of decisiveness to override the requirement of precision. He said he was responsible for his words and for the effect they had on the people who carry our work. He said he would meet with the department at 5 to discuss what respect looks like in practice. He assigned timelines with names and dates, kept the pace, and did not let the tone drift into apology. She said he should outline the guardrails for language in leadership channels. I said now while the room still remembered the timbre of the hour. I wrote that gratitude comes before growth. I wrote that founders are not ghosts, and that stewardship means standing by the people who build the product and the customers who trust it. I wrote that we would keep each other honest and kind. Mark read over my shoulder and said that simple always beats grand. Samantha asked to scan it for the record once we added signatures. Olivia said she would draft a short note to managers with 3 sentences they could use if anyone asked in the hallway what had happened. She said the sentences would say that the board had reaffirmed the charter, that leadership had clarified expectations, and that the work continued with respect. I thought about the office on Larimer Street, about the chipped mugs, about how many times in the last decade we had believed we were finished learning the same lesson. Respect is not a past tense. It is a habit, or it is nothing. A message from Chloe asked if I was still breathing. I wrote back that I was, and that I would see her at dinner. When I returned to the room, Mark was speaking softly with Michael. They shook hands and set a date for the steering committee session. Harold gathered his things and said he would see us at 1. Ethan came back in last and hovered by the door. He said he was heading to prepare for the 5 o'clock. He said he would send me a note afterward with what he heard and what he planned to change. He offered accountability. I told him that would be enough for now. He left without another word. Their tone. I told him to give me 10 minutes in the side room with the glass wall. The door closed behind him, and I stood alone in the larger room. I picked up the folio, felt the weight of the papers inside, and let the feel of them settle into my palm. She said she had thought about last night, about the word he used, about the way it landed on me, like a weight dropped from a careless height. She said she was sorry. She asked if she should find Ethan. I said he had a room full of people to face first, that he would be better for the facing. He said Michael wanted a few minutes with leadership before he left the building. He asked for 2 reassurances. He wanted a letter of governance that told his board plainly that the charter stood and that the people who held it were not at each other's throats. He also wanted to know whether I would attend the steering session as an observer for the first 2 months. Mark said both were possible. I said the letter would go out today, and that I would sit in on the steering session without pulling the wheel from anyone's hands. She said a local tech blog had sent a note to the press inbox asking whether a founder had tried to retake control. Samantha recommended that we move the joint staff note up to early afternoon and that we post the governance letter to the customer portal at the same time. He asked if he should address his team before 5. I said the chairs were right, and the slides would only get in the way. He said Michael had asked him to confirm a date for a pilot review, and he had confirmed it, and it had felt like honesty when he did. The governance letter said only what needed saying and nothing more. I wrote that the house was holding and the windows were opening. He said Michael had suggested that both of us attend the client roundtable at 2. I told him I would be there. I told him he would take the lead, and I would sit with my hands folded until he asked me to speak. We took the elevator down 1 floor to the larger ballroom, where the roundtable would be held. I told her to go home and give herself the kindness of a quiet room. Back upstairs, Samantha handed Mark 2 envelopes. She said she had asked communication to pre-write an answer for the press blog that said nothing had changed and that the company was focused on customers. Harold said he would add his name to that too. Olivia approached Ethan with a printed agenda for his 5 o'clock. Guardrails. Commitment. She told him to start the meeting by acknowledging the morning and then to ask the room what respect looks like in their daily work. He said he would. She told him to leave 5 minutes at the end for people to suggest phrases leaders should stop using. He grimaced and then smiled, a small, real thing that made him look younger and more human. 2 sales managers walked by with a buzz of nervous energy and then quieted when they saw us standing together. I caught their eyes and said that the round table would be straightforward and that we would answer what needed answering. They nodded and kept moving the way people do when they want to be useful and invisible at the same time. We had 30 minutes before the round table. Mark suggested we go over the main talking points. Ethan outlined the rollout dates and the expected outcomes, and the one risk he knew Michael would push on. He spoke without flourish, and I could see the work under the words. Mark added a note about staffing continuity and how we would shield the customer team from internal noise. I said I would tell one short story if asked, the one about the first contract that taught us how to keep promises even when the weekend complained. Mark said that would land well. The ballroom started to fill. The low murmur of early arrivals rolled across the carpet in waves. A sound tech clicked something at the back, and then clicked it again. Michael entered and scanned the room the way a scout maps a tree line. He saw us and walked over. He said his board chair had replied to the governance letter with a single word. Good. He smiled a little and said we would talk about features and people, now the reason any of this mattered at all. Ethan adjusted his cuff and then let his hands fall. I checked mine and felt the cool weight of the metal touch my skin. I breathed in and let the air settle under my ribs. Mark gave a small nod as if starting a race that did not require speed, only posture. Chairs pulled in. Notebooks opened. The moderator from our side walked to the front and welcomed everyone with the first sentences of a meeting that would decide more than its agenda promised. I set my hands together and let them rest, ready to lift when needed and ready to stay folded when that would serve better. The moderator welcomed the group and handed the first questions to Michael. Ethan took the lead with a steady voice, walking through the rollout and the checkpoints that mattered to a customer who lives in calendar squares. Michael asked about security tests on the latest build, and Ethan pointed to the director who owned that lane. A manager from another client asked about staffing continuity over the next quarter. Mark stepped in and said that the customer team would hold steady and that any hiring would be additive, not a shuffle. He wanted assurance that the company would carry momentum even if mornings like this got noisy. I said that stories do not keep customers. I said that in the second year of the company, we promised a delivery date that looked safe until the week it did not. I said that the rule we took from that weekend still holds. We keep the promise, even if we have to cut a new path to do it. He asked how that rule survived when leadership changed shape. I said that stewardship does not vanish because a founder steps back. It either moves into the behaviors people copy, or it dies. I said that when Ethan joined the company, I placed him on a small account, not because he was small, but because I wanted him to learn the grip before he learned the climb. I said that there was a night 3 years ago when a client in Phoenix called to say they were done. I called the client and asked for a single day. He said that this was the assurance he needed to carry back. He said that when a company remembers its promises at this level, customers sleep better. He said that the board does not worship origin stories, but it honors them. He said that any future decisions about governance would be made with that honor intact. He said that customers do not care who gets credit if the work arrives with respect. He said he had believed he had built his ladder alone. He said he had been wrong. He said that the room had given him a path, and that whether he walked, it would be up to him. Harold said that the board would stand behind the decision to speak plainly about stewardship. Olivia appeared at the door and said that the rumor mill would quiet as soon as the staff note hit inboxes. She said that humility is loud in a building, louder than pride because it is so rare. I felt the bruise of last night again, the word that had been tossed across a table like a small rock. Samantha returned with copies of the staff note now stamped and sent. Gratitude before growth, continuity of stewardship, respect as daily work. My name and Mark's sat under those lines with Harold's in the middle. It looked like a doorframe. People would walk through it today and tomorrow and forget that someone had to choose the width so that everyone could fit. I stood and felt a faint sway in my knees, not from age, from release. Mark suggested we take 10 minutes before the next block. Harold said he would use the time to call a board member who liked to hear the temperature directly. Samantha said she would file the hard copies and check in with communications about the press blog. Olivia said she would sit with a team lead who had sent her a note that read, "Nervous, but optimistic." They left me with the room and the view. I walked to the glass and watched the street. A delivery van double parked, and a cyclist threaded the gap with a little shake of his head. 2 women laughed on the corner, and then went serious again when the light changed. A boy tugged at his father's sleeve and pointed at a crane, that tall patience that holds heavy things in the air. I touched the cufflink and thought of all the hands that had held the ladder while others climbed. The knot in my chest loosened a fraction. Behind me, the door opened and closed very softly. I turned and saw Ethan standing just inside. He said he had called his mother and told her the round table went well. He said he had also told her that he had a conversation to finish with me after 5. He took a breath and his face worked as if 2 gears were trying to meet teeth. He said that whatever happened next, he would not hide from it. Then he stepped back out, as if even that much had cost him, and he needed the hallway to balance. I watched the door for a long moment after it closed. The room was quiet, in the honest way rooms are, when everyone has left them more carefully than they entered. I checked my watch, and the day told me it still had hours to spend. I gathered the folio, smoothed the page on top, and walked toward the corridor where the next conversation already waited for us, patient and unavoidable. Mark caught up and said he had left sandwiches in the small room, then waved me on when I shook my head. He said he would be in the ballroom reviewing the afternoon schedule. Samantha passed with her folio tucked against her side, already on the phone with communications. Harold stood near a window and spoke quietly to a board member who preferred the temperature straight from the source. I took 10 minutes in the side room and let the city steady me. I checked the folio again, not because it needed checking, because the weight of paper does a small thing to a person who grew up believing that proof should be held and not only seen. I sent a short message to Linda and told her we were moving, not running. By 4:30, Olivia texted that the room was set for the 5 o'clock. She added that she would start the meeting with 2 sentences and then give Ethan the floor. I thanked her and said I would stand along the wall if there was space. 20 of Ethan's team sat in the circle. Olivia stood just inside the door and welcomed everyone. She said we had had a full day and that this half hour belonged to the team. She said Ethan had asked to speak and also to listen. He said he would start by owning what was his. He said that language he had drafted had been careless about people who deserved care. He said he wanted to hear what respect looked like when you were the one carrying a quota and a bag and a phone that never slept. A woman from the Southwest region spoke first. She said respect looks like not hearing about major changes from a hallway whisper. She said respect sounds like leaders giving credit by name without making it a parade. A senior manager said respect looks like bad news delivered on time so that teams can adjust without feeling like fools. A coordinator said respect looks like not being asked to perform panic to make someone else look decisive. A man who rarely spoke raised his head and said he had felt small since morning. He said he had spent a decade trying to be counted and had heard a phrase about trimming that sounded like a knife. He said the clarification at midday helped, but words leave marks even when you sand them. Ethan swallowed and said that the mark was his to acknowledge. He said he would make changes and that they would be visible. Olivia asked for examples. The analyst said, "Do not cut the travel budget and then demand FaceTime." A manager said, "Do not move a renewal off my plate at the last minute and call it empowerment." Another said, "Do not put my people in a deck as decoration and then leave them out of the call." Ethan wrote notes with a pen, not a laptop. After 10 minutes, Olivia asked Ethan to speak to commitments. He said he would set a weekly open door hour where anyone could come without scheduling through layers. He said he would review how governance conversations were framed and that stewardship would be named in those conversations. He said behavior was. He looked toward the back wall where I was standing. He said there was another apology he owed the one he had avoided for longer than it took to say it. He said that last night he had called his father dead weight. He said he had done it in front of others. He said he had done it because he wanted to look like a man who had built a ladder without help. He said he had learned today how a ladder is made and how long it takes to hold one for someone else. Ethan took another step. His knee hit the carpet first, then the other. He said he was sorry. He said he was ashamed. He said that whatever name he built would not be built over the bones of the man who gave him a place to stand. Olivia looked down. Mark stood in the doorway with Harold at his shoulder, both men quiet and very still. Ethan kept speaking, not in a rush, not as a performance. He said he would accept whatever consequence the board required. He said he would sit with every team lead one by one and hear what they needed from him. He said he would try to be the kind of man his mother thought he already was. A chair creaked. Olivia looked up and met my eyes. Harold's face was set in the complicated expression of a man who has learned that mercy travels a narrow road between two ditches. I stepped forward. I stood a foot from Ethan and could see the small nick on his cheek from a hurried shave. He closed his eyes for a second and then opened them. He said he would get up when I told him to. I thought of the garage smell of our first office of the morning, when Mark and I signed papers that made a thin idea into a thin company with a strong will. I thought of the weekend in Phoenix and the first contract and the bad coffee and the light on a whiteboard at 2 a.m. I thought of a small boy with a plastic bat in the yard of a lanky teenager, rolling his eyes at a starter account, of a young man walking across a stage to shake a hand mine and then another. It can also let it go and choose only the strand that matters now. I bent not far enough to bring my voice to him, without making him crane upward. I told him to stand when I asked and not before. He nodded and waited. I wanted to find words that were not about humiliation and not about rescue. I wanted to find the sentence that sits between those two things and makes a bridge that can hold a man's weight without making him forget why he needed it. Behind us, the room waited. No one coughed. No one shifted a bag. If a phone buzzed, it died before the sound reached us. The evening had moved in behind the windows, and the city put on its soft lights that make everything look more forgiving than it is. Then I placed my hand on his shoulder, a firm touch, not heavy, and the room seemed to lean a degree toward that small motion. I did not lift him. I did not bless him. I did not leave him on the floor. I kept my palm there, felt the bone and the heat under the fabric, and made the choice a father has to make when a son comes to the end of his own ladder and finds out who set it on the ground in the first place. I told him to stand. He rose slowly, not dramatic, just careful, as if he was helping his own body remember how to be upright. I kept my hand on his shoulder a moment longer, and then let it fall. Mark stepped into the doorway with Harold beside him. He said we would clear the room for a few minutes and ask the board members and council and human resources to remain. Harold looked at me first. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to hold two truths at once. The first was that harm had been done. The second was that work had been done today to begin repair. I said, I would not seek to end a career in this hour if there was a path that preserved dignity and protected the company. Harold nodded and then turned to the others. He said that swift consequences sometimes teach better than slow lessons. Samantha took a note and then looked up to ask Olivia for an assessment of the team temperature. They wanted a clear line that the language would end. They wanted to see a leader carry weight without pushing it downhill. They wanted to hear that respect had teeth. Ethan stood near the wall with his hands clasped. He did not speak. I told him to come back to the circle. I said that forgiveness without conditions is not stewardship. I said that I would accept his apology if he accepted a path that would test it. I proposed 6 months of probation with 3 elements. First, the language change would be written and visible and measured. Second, his role would include a weekly hour in which he met with 2 people from the team who would speak plainly chosen by Olivia, and the notes would go to human resources. Third, he would take the most difficult region for 1 quarter with limited support, and the performance would be reviewed by Mark and Harold, not by him. Any failure to respect the line or any attempt to shift blame would end the probation and his employment. Harold asked Samantha if the structure was sound. She said the plan was reasonable and enforceable if the terms were written and acknowledged in advance. She added that an apology to the company should be documented as a leadership communication, not a personal note, so that it did not become rumor again. Mark said he would fund the coaching and schedule the reviews. The first board member spoke again and said he still favored termination. He said that retention of a leader who had used the phrase that had been used could be read as weakness. The second board member said that an immediate firing could be read as fear, and that patience could read as strength if the framework was strict. Harold asked Ethan to speak. Ethan said that the conditions were fair. He said he would sign them and live under them. He said he would not ask for easier terms. He said he understood that this was his last chance to be the kind of leader he had pretended to be. Samantha outlined the steps to formalize the probation. She said she would draft a short agreement within the hour signed by Ethan and countersigned by the chair. She said she would add an acknowledgement of the coaching requirement and the reporting line. She asked Olivia to send the names of 2 rotating team members for the weekly sessions. Harold asked for a vote. Harold declared the motion carried and asked Samantha to prepare the paper for signatures. Mark thanked the room and then turned to Ethan. He said that mercy had come with work attached. He said that if the work was not done or if the behavior failed, he would not hesitate. Ethan said he understood. We opened the door and let the team back in to gather their bags. Olivia told them that leadership would send a note by morning and that the 5 o'clock meeting had been heard. Some touched Ethan on the arm as they passed. Some did not look at him at all. Mark asked me to walk with him down the hall. He said the plan gave the company what it needed. He asked how I felt. I told him tired, steady, older than lunch, and younger than last night. Back in the side room, Samantha placed the document on the table. Ethan read each line and signed. Harold signed as chair. Samantha handed a copy to Olivia and one to Mark, and kept the original for the book. She said she would scan and file and send confirmation. Ethan asked if he could speak to me alone for a minute. He stood by the window and said that he could not undo last night, but he would not try to outrun it either. I told him that the terms were not a trap. They were a road. He said he would walk it, and then he fell quiet. Linda called. I let it go to voicemail and texted that I would call in 20 minutes. I told her I was. Olivia came back with a list for Ethan. First week agenda for the listening hour. Names for the rotation. Coaching intake at 9 tomorrow. Confirmation that the region assignment would be the Midwest, the one with 3 accounts on the edge and 1 in repair. Ethan read the list and nodded. Harold shook my hand and said he would see us all in the morning. Mark said the same and added that he would send me a draft of the staff note for final eyes. Samantha reminded Ethan that the first apology to the company would go through communications so that the words were clean and the list of commitments clear. He agreed. I turned to Ethan and said that he would come to breakfast tomorrow. He said yes. I told him to bring himself and to be ready to listen, and that would be enough for one morning. We walked out together into the hallway. The hotel lights had shifted to evening, and the carpet picked up a warmer color that made the place feel less like a business set and more like a pause. At the lobby, Mark stood near the plants, true to his word. I told him I would take my own car and that I wanted the air. He nodded. I walked to the car with the folio under my arm. At the curb, I paused. I drove out onto 17th and let the evening traffic gather me up. I eased forward, the city opening ahead in a long, clean line, the kind of line you can follow if you remember why you drew it in the first place. She asked if I had slept. She asked if breakfast with our son would be at the diner on Colfax or the one near the art museum. Ethan was already inside. Ethan said he had read the probation terms again before sleeping and again before leaving the house. He said he wanted to start with thank you. He said he would stand in front of his team at noon and put the new guardrails in plain language. He said he would call the Midwest client that had been wounded last year by our delays and ask for a fresh session with their steering group. He said he had told himself to be a man who did the work even when no one was taking notes on it. When he set his fork down, he said he had one request. He said that when the 6 months were done, if the work had been done, he wanted a conversation about what leadership means in a company built by a father and a friend and held by a lot of hands that had nothing to do with his last name. I told him that leadership is not a settlement, it is a daily cost. He asked what to do about his mother. I said he would not try to sell it as a transformation story. We finished breakfast and paid and stepped out into the clear air. He let go first and said he would see me at the office. She asked how breakfast had gone, and I told her good enough for a start. She said Chloe had called to say her students had argued about a theme in a poem and then resolved it with grace and that she hoped grown people would do the same. She said that she would make dinner and that Chloe would come by and that if Ethan wanted to show his face, he would be welcome. The governance letter did what it was meant to do. Michael sent a note 2 weeks later that read simply, "On track." Ethan kept the Thursday hour. Ethan sent me his own notes late on Fridays. He wrote that he had walked into a meeting with a plan to talk and left having listened. He wrote that he had apologized to an analyst for ignoring her warning on a forecast and that she had given him a better path. I said little. Mark kept the room steady and asked hard questions that did not feel like traps. Harold kept the board focused on the work instead of the heat. Samantha made sure the minutes were worth keeping, because minutes can become the memory when the humans forget. One afternoon, about 5 weeks in, Ethan stopped by the house unannounced. He asked if dinner was on, and Linda said dinner was always on if you walked in and meant it. Ethan listened and asked questions and did not make it about himself. After dinner, he helped me lift a bag of soil for the garden boxes. At the end of the second month, Michael brought his board chair to a meeting. Afterward, she shook my hand and said that companies usually talk about culture like a screensaver. She said that ours looked like a thing being done instead of said. By the 4th month, the region Ethan had taken was ahead of plan. He sent short updates with numbers that did not wobble and the names of the people who had done the work. Olivia wrote that the Thursday hour had turned into something half the building wanted to attend. We met at the diner again, the morning the 6 months ended. Ethan said he had signed the final review without a pause. He said that if the chair asked whether he wanted his old pace back, he would say no. He said he had learned that pressure and purpose are not the same. He asked how a man should carry gratitude without looking like he has given up ambition. He asked me what I wanted now. I told him I wanted him to keep his Thursday hour and to show up for the work he had promised, and to be a son who visited his mother because she does not get probation, and reviews she gets days. He laughed and said he would do all 3. We paid and stood and walked out into a sky that had made peace with the sun. There is a sentence I kept to myself until now. Last night, after the staff note went out and the room had emptied, I stood in the small room with the glass wall and the city below, and I said the phrase he had used under my breath to see if it still had power. It did not. Words can be stripped if you take their podium away. It mattered that he had knelt yes, but not because I needed victory. It mattered because he had chosen the floor when pride offered him a chair. Humility did the cutting that anger would have botched. Karma is not a hammer. It is a mirror that appears when you have run out of places to look away. We closed the loop on a Friday afternoon with a simple gathering in the cafe at the office. No speeches, just a short note from Mark that said thank you to the people who had kept the house together while we repaired a beam. Ethan stood with a coffee and let others talk. Samantha laughed at something Olivia said, a sound I had not heard in that building in too long. Harold sat with a junior staffer and asked about a niece in college. Michael sent a picture from an airport with thumbs up and a line that read, "See you next week." I drove home at dusk with the windows open a fraction. Linda had left the porch light on, and the smell of something good drifted down the steps. I set the folio on the hall table and walked to the kitchen. She asked if the day had been enough. I said yes. She said that the kettle was ready and that Chloe would be over Sunday. The house held its familiar sounds and the ordinary quiet we had earned. I thought of the first office of the whiteboard light at 2 a.m. of the diner coffee of the carpet that had held our knees and our decisions. I thought of a ladder and the hands that hold it and the ones that climb, and how neither hand is worth a name without the other. If you have walked this far with me, if this story meant something to you, I would be grateful if you share and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive and brings them to people who might need the reminder that respect and mercy still build better rooms than pride ever could.